Alright everybody, the long promised round the world update. This is my 29 miscellaneous where we always start. Nothing really going on in here except for yesterday I did a bunch of work in my gourami tank and I removed a bunch of plants, namely temple plants. And you can probably tell this looks a lot greener and bushier than it used to. And I did indeed plant both temple plants that I pulled out of the gourami tank in here. This one back here is the one that was in the far back corner and was fully rooted in. So I was able to get those roots down in the ground a little bit and put some rocks on top of it just to get it started down in the substrate. Now this is just inert substrate. It's just that hard dense foam that they call gravel. But it is inert, so it's basically down to the fish waste is the only thing that really feeds my plants in this tank, which is one of the reasons that this tank doesn't have a whole lot in the way of plants in it. That is the cutting that I took off the top of one of the plants that was really dense and thick. So I also have that down in the substrate and some rocks holding it in place until it gets rooted in or starts fading away and dying off. We'll see. Don't know what's going to happen to it just yet because, like I said, it's in inert substrate, so we'll see what goes on there. Otherwise, nothing at all is happening in there. I guess you could say I did make one little minor change. This piece of wood over here is now over here, and it used to be propped up on that flat rock right there to create sort of a little bridge, but I figured since you can't see it behind this new plant, may as well move the wood over so you can see it over here. So that's really all that's going on in that tank. The gourami tank is just newly pruned or groomed, whatever you want to say, as far as the plants go. The plant that I was talking about in the back corner, you couldn't really see. It really was down in the back corner near the filter intake, and it was behind this big piece of wood I've got. I know that wood doesn't really show up well on video, but there's a really big piece of wood right there on the right hand side of this tank, and it completely obscured that temple plant, so there was really no point in having it in there. It was growing into the filter intake and starting to clog it up. So I removed that one altogether. I also cut a bunch of the red tiger lotus down because it was floating on the surface, and right there in the middle where all those roots are hanging free is right where I snipped the top half of that temple plant. It was really getting dense and bushy, and it was blocking a lot of light and even blocking a lot of the water flow in the tank. So that is what we just looked at in the 29. I did have some issues with my snakeskin gourami. She was exhibiting behavior that looked as though it was a swim bladder issue or some sort of infection or illness. And as time went on, I monitor closely, and long story short, she's recovered, and I think she was just physically injured. I think she just took a shot to the head or something like that. She darted and dashed, and she bashed her head into something, and she just took a few days to get over it. I did see her moving her tail fin today, which was my last concern. At first she started out not even being able to swim properly, and then she was able to get around okay, but she still looked like she was half paralyzed. And as time has gone on, she doesn't use her tail fin a lot, but I have seen her actually move it. And she has always been a little unusual. She's got a little curl to one part of her tail fin, and her back has always had that sort of little hump in it. So it's not out of the question that she's just genetically not the best stock, and there are other issues going on with her as well. But all in all, she's fine. She's fully recovered as far as I'm concerned, and I'm not really worried about anything else going on with that. I did get some really cool video the other day in here that I've put together. So I have shot a tank cam video that lets you hear my loaches in there clicking. You can hear some otocinclus chewing on the camera. You can hear the scraping, scratching sound of their teeth. So I found it interesting how noisy it is inside this tank with the camera in there running. And I even talked to the camera a little bit while it's in the tank, so you get an idea of what the fish hear when I'm standing here doing stuff like this, for example. The fish can certainly hear every word I'm saying. Whether they understand it or not, I doubt, but they can certainly hear it. My angelfish tank. I got in there, I guess it's been a while since I've done my last update. I got in there and I did a lot of maintenance as well. I removed a lot of the plants. I removed a lot of the substrate. I'm in the process of getting this white substrate out of there. Every time I do a water change now, I'm going to use a siphon and a bucket, and I'm going to siphon some more of the white gravel out, and eventually I'm going to start filtering black gravel in. But I know from experience that if I leave one speck of that white gravel in there, it will find a way to turn up and annoy me. You really got to get everything out of it, or as much as you possibly can, if you really want to try to swap out one for the other. I still have little bits and pieces of purple and green gravel popping up in some of my tanks that I didn't fully clean out when it was an earlier tank, and then I rescaped it. The wood you see in there is the original wood that I found in the stream across the street from my house. I attached Anubias and Java to it when I first set this tank up several years ago, and the Java was pretty rough. I actually tore all that off and threw it away. The Anubias, however, was doing so well that when I tried to move it, this clump you can see here on the right is actually rooted to the rocks, and it tore off of the main body. It actually came from this end of this piece, and when I ripped it off, I turned the wood around and put it back in the tank facing the other direction. So the the Anubias will continue to grow, but it'll be growing away from the direction it was growing before, since I've basically just flipped it around now. This branch keeps leaning forward. That should be facing more or less in an upright position, that sort of angle right there. And what is happening is these leaves are all facing towards us instead of facing up towards the light. So I got to get in there and just sort of roll that back over and maybe put a little rock next to this side to sort of prop it up and hold it there. Otherwise, I can't think anything else that's going on in this tank that I've done other than just, shooting some video here and there, taking photos. Said before, if you're not already following me on Google+, you should go ahead and do that. I do a lot of photography of my fish as well, so I've been doing a lot of filming of this tank recently. My T-bar tank. What to do with my T-bar tank, and really what to do with my T-bar is the real question. He just insists on building this mountain, which is killing my plants. Not even sure what that is. I think it's Val. That's what it looks like anyway. I saw, and of course I didn't get my camera in time. By the time I got it and, got to the tank, it was done and over. But the black ghost knifefish was out, and he was swimming around the tank, and he had gone into this cave system here on the left and looked like he was seeking shelter. And of course the T-bar can fit in there, and followed him in. And they were having it out. They went around the tank. It was pretty exciting. I really wish I had gotten it on camera, but of course I did not. But the T-bar is no match in size for the black ghost. The black ghost is getting really big, and it is just such an interesting fish, and the way it moves and just everything about it is so neat. As much as I like that T-bar, when you really get right down to it, it's an attractive cichlid. What else is there to say about it? It's an attractive cichlid. That black ghost knifefish is a very unusual fish. You can see fish that swim around like this cichlid all day long. You don't get to see fish swim around like a black ghost knifefish on a regular basis. So I think it's time for the T-bar to find a new home. I'm tired of him destroying the tank. I find it interesting, and I like watching him. I like watching his behavior. You can tell he's getting mad at me because whenever he digs it out now, instead of just swimming over to the pile and spitting it out, he swims all the way up to the top of the glass, and then he just looks at me, and then he spits the rocks right at me. And that's why the pile is moving further and further over this way. As the gravel drifts down in the current, it moves to the left. But you can tell he's attempting to move it further and further away from his little cave, and the only way he can do that is by swimming higher and higher up the glass. And I swear he looks me right in the eye before he spits the rock out. So it's almost become a battle of wills at this point. I keep tearing it down and filling the corner back in, and then he keeps rebuilding his mountain there. So today, after seeing him harass the black ghost knifefish the way he was, I think it's just time for him to move on. It's been neat. I've really enjoyed him, but I can probably go trade him. I know I can go trade him in for some store credit, and maybe we can get something else interesting to do, another tank or something else, whatever. Again, I just think it's time for him to move on. Otherwise, nothing new going on in this tank. Nothing really going on in my 20 long open top either. Recently, I did cut a piece of that what is that called, arrowhead plant, and throw it in there just loose and floating, and you can see it's doing pretty well, and you can see all these new roots growing on it. Every time it starts growing up and out, the root growth actually pushes it down and in. So that's all new root growth there, if you can see it amongst the glare. So it's doing really well. It's definitely in the philodendron family, and it's definitely a plant that can live in water, provided it's well oxygenated water. This is the tank I had the ick outbreak in not long ago, and I've had no issues with this tank since, other than the ongoing battle with the algae and cyanobacteria, which is all just part of the tank. It's, you know, again, not that big a deal. I don't really consider it a battle. It's just part of the tank maintenance for me. You want a brightly lit tank that's got lights on for 12 hours a day, you're going to have algae in it, you know. So nothing really going on in here. I am really considering making some major changes to this end of the fish room. And when I say this end of the fish room, I'm talking about my brackish tank as well. Take a step back here for a moment. You can see how we've got the wall comes down flat, and then we get a 45-degree angle or thereabouts on my T-bar tank, and then we have these last little bit of tanks that sort of stick over to this side of the room before we start over here. So I think I'm going to make some changes to these final 3 tanks and recreate the way the bottom end of the room sits. What I'm leaning towards is just having one larger tank right here at the end and getting rid of these smaller tanks. But have no fear, I'm not planning on getting rid of Butterbean. I am planning on setting him up a different tank. Instead of this 20 long, I think I want to put him in a 20 standard, and I think I just want to start the tank over from scratch. I am so tired of dealing with this red cyanobacteria in there. It just will not go away. I've treated it, I've vac for it, I've, you know, cut his feeding back to keep the bioload down. You can see he's right up there banging against the glass. He's constantly hungry. The other day I shot some video of him, and a lot of people commented he looked like a damn beach ball in there. He looked like he's ready to pop. And I think he had rooted around and found a little patch of snails living under something that he hadn't formerly been able to get to, and he must have gorged himself, because he really was a fat little butterbean that day. But by the next morning he was back to normal. You have to be careful. If you've got a puffer, they will just eat and eat and eat, and because of the nature of their elastic belly, they can just eat and eat and eat, and they can literally eat themselves to death, and they will if given the opportunity. So, you know, just because he's banging against the glass and acting like he hasn't eaten in a week, don't let that fool you. He's well fed and well taken care of. So the only thing that's not taken care of is the tank, unless you want to think of the cyanobacteria as part of the tank, in which case it's thriving and doing great. I mean, just standing above this tank, it just stinks. God, I hate the smell of this stuff. And you can see it's already back in these big sheets. If I got in there, I could just peel them up again. You see the bubbles. Presumably that's CO2. That's a byproduct from the photosynthesis that's going on. It could be oxygen, but I think it's CO2 with the cyanobacteria. I think that does something a little different than your regular plants do, and I think that actually increases CO2. It is a bacteria, not a plant. It's, well, it's kind of like a cross between the two. It's a very primitive bacteria. It's strange. Anyway, I think that's what's probably going to wind up happening with this tank. I'm just tired of it. I am afraid if I start it up and set it up again that somehow I'm going to cross-contaminate it. I really do believe it's something to do with the brackish water. I don't have this problem in any of my other tanks. It's just I can't get it out of this tank. And it's the red stuff, and I don't have that in any other tank. And the way I handle my tanks, if this was something that would really thrive in my freshwater tanks, it would by now. I'm sure I would have cross-contaminated something. But it's this tank, and it just grows in there like a monster, and I cannot get rid of it. So like I say, I'm just getting kind of tired of this whole end. I do have my quarantine tank down there up and running. I do have another 10 or 12 neons swimming around in there. They've been in there for about 2 weeks. And on that note, I will say that I have learned my lesson when it comes to quarantining animals, that simply quarantining them is not enough. The likelihood of you bringing home some sort of unwanted parasite internally or externally is highly likely. Most animals are going to come home from the pet store with some sort of parasite in their gut or something. It might not be harmful necessarily, but it's still not something I want to bring home and put in my tank and potentially affect other fish. So if I'm going to take the time to quarantine them, I just go ahead and use Paragard now, and I just dose them for the first few days with Paragard, and then leave them in quarantine for a few weeks, and that should do it. I also learned my lesson about not only quarantining, but actually paying close attention to the animals once they've been quarantined. So maybe I'll shoot a video on that and talk a little more about the lessons I learned, although I feel like I kind of covered that in my video when I wrapped up with the ick treatment. Anyway, my snail tank is still just my snail tank. Nothing really going on in there. I have spoken to some people recently. Got a few questions about whether or not those are indeed eggshells in the bottom, and they are. My water is very, very soft. I have very low carbonates and very low dissolved calcium. So the snails or any kind of crustacean need calcium for their shells. So I just throw some eggshells in there. I don't particularly do anything. Just having eggs for breakfast one day, I give them a rinse to get most of the slimy stuff out, and then I just toss them in there. And that's about it. And I've noticed from experiments before that within days of the eggshells being in there, the shells of the snails would start to get harder. And so it definitely works. If you don't care what it looks like, go ahead and throw some eggshells in your snail tank, and that'll be a good source of calcium for them. My gudgeon tank. I just did a video on this one the other day as well, where I got in there and did a lot of cleaning. I'm still getting a lot of diatoms in this tank, and it's partially because it's new, and it's partially because I keep doing these really, really massive water changes, I think. And I checked my tap water, and my tap water actually has about 2 parts per million dissolved silicates, and that is plenty enough for diatoms to use to make their little hard shells, and that's what all that brown stuff in there is. So as long as I keep doing these massive water changes, I think I'm going to continue prolonging the length of time it takes the diatoms to sort of work their way out of the tank. It's fairly common to get them in a new tank, but they should go away within a few months. So now that I know that, I am going to take it easy on the water changes. I'm going to do smaller, more frequent water changes, which is always more, recommended. And hopefully we won't see a ton of that diatom algae growth. Other than that, I'm still sort of on the fence with this tank. Don't really know what I want to do with it. I find it very boring. It's very pretty to look at, but it's pretty to look at in a photographic sort of sense, not to sit and watch it really. The gudgeons don't do a lot unless I'm really active in front of them. Then they just beg for food like puppies. But when I'm sitting in my chair on the other side of the room and I look over here, I generally just see a tank that has some plants in it. And it's not even particularly interesting. It's just 2 big clumps of green in a tank, and then maybe I'll see the gudgeons banging up against the glass wanting more food. So while they are really fascinating fish, and they're really beautiful fish, they really are. That's the thing that's keeping them here as long as they've been here, is they are just fantastic looking. I love them. But they're boring in an odd sort of way. I know that sounds weird to say that, but it's one thing for you to see a video of them from time to time. When you sit here and have these in a tank the whole time, you'll notice you haven't even seen the other one. The other one's just down in the bushes somewhere and probably sees no point in coming out because there's no food out. So that's about what I see all day. Again, not a lot of excitement. So we will think about this tank again. It's possible those gudgeons might get rehomed. It's possible I might add something to this tank. It's possible I might just get rid of the gudgeons altogether and change this tank into something different. But I've been saying that for a long time now, so who knows, a year from now you'll probably still be hearing me say I'm going to do something with this tank any day now. So that's what's going on with the gudgeon tank. Pretty much nothing but a big water change and glass cleaning. I can no longer say last on my 125, but we'll get to that. I don't want to spoil the surprise if you don't know already, and I'm sure you probably do, but we'll get to it when we get to it. This is my 125. Not a lot going on in here either. I haven't really done anything or changed anything. Yeah, I can't think of anything that I've done to this tank. Nothing really notable to speak of. There's no new inhabitants. Well, I guess there is one new inhabitant. It's one that we're probably never going to see. When I had my ick outbreak in the 20 long, amongst the fish that were infected were white tipped long-fin bristlenose pleco, or ancestris rather, and it did not deal well with the heat at all. Within the first 4 days at 90 degrees, which should have been enough to kill the ick off, but was really having a bad impact on the fish. So I took the fish out, I put it in quarantine. It did look like I got the ick with the 4 days of heat treatment like that, but just to be safe, I did keep it in quarantine, and I used the Paragard on it. And kept it in there for a few weeks, and I never saw any signs of it coming back. So I took it as a sign that everything was okay, and I then put that fish in this tank rather than back in my 20 long open top. I've been wanting to get at least one of those plecos out of there. There was 4. The one chocolate zebra died from the ick, and then I was able to get this little ancestral species out of here. And ever since it's been in there, I've seen it about 3 times. It's a very small fish. Let me see if I can find where it is, and we'll see if we can get the camera close enough to get a look at it. I think I might see it. Let's go have a look. I do see it. Right behind him, if you can see its profile on that rock under there, it's sort of between the 2 rocks. There it is, moving around a little bit. So I've got another sort of algae eating fish, but it's a cave dwelling reclusive fish, and again, unless we have a little tiny glimpse like this, we're probably never going to see it, and it won't ever get particularly large. So this is one that's going to be pretty reclusive and difficult to spot in here. So I guess that would be something new. Depends on how new you want to call new. I guess it's been about a month now since it's been in there, but I don't think I've actually mentioned it now that I'm sitting here thinking about it a little bit. I also noticed today that while I've always had trouble with the red tiger lotus in here, I'm really beginning to wonder why I'm having as much trouble as I am. They grow like mad in my gourami tank, and yet this one and this one, which clearly gets plenty of light, are just, they're not doing well. They're not thriving. They were much bigger than this before. They're getting smaller and smaller and just withering away. So I'm not really sure what's going on with that. But it's a shame, and next time I'm down the fish store, I'm probably going to get more and try again, because I really do like the tiger lotus. They're a really pretty plant, and they looked really good when they were a little more full in this tank. And that's about it as far as I can think. Of course, I've said that twice now, but then I came up with something to talk about. Mainly I'm just trying to fill some time so we can get a decent look at this tank. I know there's a lot going on in there. There's a lot of fish, there's a lot of rock structure, a lot of plants, a lot of woodwork, which is just the way I like my tanks. I like them busy, I like them full, and I like them natural. So this is my male. This is also something I wanted to point out. That is my male snakeskin gourami, and while you can't see it very clearly right now, if you look at both of his pectoral fins, he has these weird sort of growths on them. They look like sort of tumors or something, and I've never known what they are, but he's had them since I got him and he was a little baby. They've never grown, they've never hindered him. I've never really worried that much about it. It always just has been there. So speaking of the genetic stock, I got this one and the female at the same time, and as with most gouramis, that just didn't work out in the tank, and I wound up having to separate them, and that's why the male is in this tank and the female is in my gourami tank. But stock-wise, I don't think they came from the best stock in the world. So, that might explain a little bit about why I'm having troubles with the female. They're not that old. I think they're both about 3 years old at this point. Now I can say last, but certainly not least, is my new crayfish tank. Not a lot to really update on this, because this is the first time I've ever talked about this on one of my Around the World updates. But this is a crayfish tank. I currently have 4 crayfish in there. I have some plants from out in the yard. That's Creeping Jenny. This is more Creeping Jenny off to the right here. The bluish gray stuff is Stone Crop, which is a type of succulent. That is a hosta, the broadleaf sort of green leaves, and the ones that are dying off are hosta. And then this is a sensitive fern, and these new little shoots are actually new shoots of fern that have been coming up. And then there's just some moss and grass, and this is all just stuff I pulled up out of the yard. There is one of the crayfish right there. I'm doing a total drama crayfish series where we're following along with what's happening with everybody and the different personalities in the tank. I had one with one claw, then I had some fighting, and then I wound up with two with one claw, and now the big one that had one claw has no claws. So we've definitely got some more drama that's been going on, and I need to catch up and do some more video on that. So we will have more on that later. I also forgot to mention that is some of that arrowhead plant. There's a little bit of drama happening right now. This one is really skittish, as you can well imagine. It has zero defenses other than fleeing. And of course he's getting ready to go right into the dominant crayfish's cave, which is probably not the best move. And there's two smaller ones that are hiding in the back somewhere. If you're not familiar with crayfish, that is the way they retreat in a panic. They crawl forward, but they're not very fast or efficient when they're walking. If they need to flee, they simply flick their tail and they curl it around and under them, and that one forceful movement just shoots them backwards through the water. And if they need to, they can actually rapidly flick their tail, and they can go quite fast for several feet through a river, a stream, a lake, or whatever to avoid capture. They're hard to catch once they get moving. They're not too bad once you figure out that all you got to do is get behind them, and once you startle them, they shoot right on into your bucket. But most prey animals don't carry buckets when they're out catching crayfish, so we humans do have the advantage there. So that is my crayfish tank. Look forward to some more video coming up on this, and I already do have several videos. If you're not familiar with it or haven't seen it yet, go check out the crayfish tank playlist. I do have some plans for this as well. I'm waiting for it to finish cycling in. I'm still getting some nitrites showing up, but not a lot. So I would imagine within another week or so I won't be having any nitrites at all, and this tank will be fully cycled in. And what I'm going to do is go catch a few little native fish and throw them in there, some little tiny something or other, whether it's mosquito fish or minnows or something, and then that will be just a little bit of interest. It'll give the crayfish something to hunt and catch, and maybe we can get some cool video footage of them catching fish and eating fish or something like that. Crayfish are not primarily hunters, but they are pretty adept at catching fish when they want to. They scavenge, they eat tons of vegetation, they'll eat meat, they'll eat just about anything, including each other. So like I said, lots and lots of drama going on in here, and as the summertime progresses, we will continue updating you on that. So now I can say we have officially gone around the world. We are back to my 29 miscellaneous, and we are back where we started. So thanks for watching this one. If you're not already subscribed, please go ahead and do so. That way you won't miss anything that I got coming up, because in addition to these types of videos, I do lots and lots of others. I got tons on my playlist. Feel free to sort through them. Enjoy yourself. I've got over 500 videos for you to sort through, so take your time and have a good time. Thanks for watching this one, and I will see you on the next one.